Hello and welcome to Protect Ukraine Now YouTube channel. Next week, April 7th through 9, I'm going to be in Washington, D.C., meeting with various senators and representatives and advocating for Ukraine. I continue going to D.C. because Russia continues to kill Ukrainians. Today, a Russian ballistic missile killed 16 civilians in Kryvyi Rih. Among them were 6 children. As we know, for a very long time, Russia is not interested in peace, and I will do everything I can to make sure Trump's administration knows they cannot continue to operate under this illusion. In this video, I'm going to cover what I believe is important and what I intend to be talking about during my meetings in DC. The main message: the only kind of peace possible in Ukraine is peace through strength. And also, we're going to talk about why support for Ukraine is a core America First issue. Our number one priority: Ukraine must be able to stop the aggressor from advancing forward and from attacking Ukraine from the sky. Unless these conditions are met, Russia will not be interested in negotiations. The aggression against Ukraine must become cost prohibitive for Moscow. Cost prohibitive in terms of human, military, and other resources. The Trump admin must also come to a realization that this is a 100% achievable goal, and this is the only path forward towards de-escalation and eventually peace. The next concern that is worth a discussion is that Trump admin and his supporters are treating the war against Ukraine as some sort of civil dispute. They hope that eventually both sides can agree to meet somewhere in the middle, taking, of course, into account the, so to speak, cards each side holds. This is a result of a horrible misunderstanding of Russia, Ukraine, and the nature of this war. Another possibility is that Trump is too involved with China and the Middle East and simply doesn't care about concessions Ukraine may have to agree to. In either case, this is unacceptable, and we're going to address this issue. It is admirable that Trump wants to end the war. However, problems cannot be resolved without first understanding the root cause. President Trump doesn't understand this war. He doesn't see Russia as an aggressor on a quest to rebuild its empire and destroy the NATO alliance. President Trump doesn't see Russia as a vicious, smart, and dangerous enemy that must be treated as such and definitely cannot be trusted. Russian propaganda and Putin himself have never hid their animosity towards NATO and the West. Their intent is to capture all of Ukraine and other former Soviet bloc countries. Given the opportunity, they would continue west as far as they can until they are stopped by force. Understanding all of that, it is easy to conclude that peace through strength is the only way forward. Every other attempt will be a failure of the Trump administration and, of course, President Trump himself. It is in Trump's own best interest to get it right from the first time. It also pays to know why we have this war in the first place. And we have this major war in Europe, the biggest since World War II, because Putin, time after time, was able to get away with his crimes. Georgia 2008, Crimea and Donbass 2014, and now once again, President Trump admin is potentially seeking a deal and normalization of relations with Russia after a devastating, barbaric, genocidal 3 years of war against all of Ukraine. Normalizing relations with Russia is investing into future wars. Doing business with Russia is investing again in future wars where American troops are eventually going to be involved. Yes, Ukraine wants peace. In fact, Ukraine wants peace more than anyone else, and from the first day of Russian invasion in 2014. But Ukraine wants an actual peace, not another useless piece of paper with useless signatures on it. Not another set of meaningless promises. Everything that is currently discussed at the highest level with respect to Ukraine is one giant attempt to appease the aggressor and can lead to one and only one thing: continuation of aggression against Ukraine and eventually other countries. Okay, so empty talks and appeasements don't work. What works then? Of course, we are not meeting with senators and representatives in order to complain. We're going to DC because we have constructive propositions for achieving lasting peace in Ukraine. So, what is needed for achieving a lasting peace? Oh, yes, we've heard this before. We need security guarantees. We also know that the term security guarantees with respect to peace in Ukraine is ambiguous and confusing because President Zelensky or other world leaders haven't explicitly defined what that set of conditions might entail. The security guarantee may imply NATO membership, European peacekeeping forces in Ukraine, or perhaps another round of sanctions from hell. We do not know what is actually discussed between Ukraine and its allies, but it is fair to assume that as it stands, there is no consensus about it. Otherwise, we would know more details coming from official sources. It is also clear that during the latest Zelensky's visit to the White House, the topic of security guarantees became a source of major disagreement, significantly contributing to the fiasco of that day. And yet, this is a very important topic, so let's talk about what could work as security guarantees for Ukraine. Number one, armed forces of Ukraine. Yes, the armed forces of Ukraine is the most capable army in Europe and is a fundamental component of any security guarantee. They are 114 brigades strong compared to about 50 brigades that the European Union and the United Kingdom make up. They have experience that no other European army has, and as we have seen in the past 3 years, they are ready to fight and defend their homeland. It is also important to underscore that the armed forces of Ukraine fight against the collective economies of Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and they're doing that very successfully. Just like any army, they can get better. There are certain issues that Ukraine must address. However, that being said, a properly sized, properly equipped, and properly experienced Ukrainian army is definitely one of the key security guarantees needed for establishing lasting peace in Ukraine. And this is something that is definitely an achievable objective. Again, the armed forces of Ukraine must have the right set of weapons to be effective. And this is also something Protect Ukraine Now is advocating for from the first days of our existence. While we are on the armed forces of Ukraine subject, there's a great opportunity for NATO forces to learn from Ukrainians. It is well known that generals are often prepared for the past war, which is highly likely to be the case with Europe and the US. At the same time, Ukraine is fighting a highly technological modern war. The US adversaries, namely Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they are all learning this modern day technique from the other side of the trenches. I talked about it with senators and congressmen during our past meetings, and I'm going to continue this conversation when I'm in DC next week. Um, Let me say this again. I'm going back to DC to talk about many things I have already talked about 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. I'm going back because I have important things to say to our members of Congress and because these things are worth repeating. And that means that you can pick up your phone. You can call your two senators and the representative. You can also go to protectukrainenow.org, click on Letter to Congress under Congress menu, and send our pre-written letter to Congress. Before you submit that document, you'll have your chance to review the text and do whatever edits that you find necessary. The next thing I want to talk about is drones. Without a doubt, drones have revolutionized modern warfare, and this drastic change is hard to miss. Anyone who is following the Russian-Ukrainian war is aware of this pivotal role drone technology playing on the battlefield, and many of you have seen very impressive drone action footage. The key strategic advantage of utilizing the drone technology is the procurement complexity and cost of drone units versus its target. In other words, two drones that cost, let's say, $700 a pop can take out a $2 million tank. Thanks to this sort of asymmetry, Ukraine is able to actively stand to aggressor despite its much larger economy. Let's talk a little more about some numbers because they really matter, and this is something our senators and representatives must know. 70 to 80% of Russian losses are due to Ukrainian-made drone tech. Roughly $5 billion, and this is an estimate, were invested into production of this equipment since February of 2022. Roughly $1 billion of that investment came from private donations by Ukrainian public, diaspora abroad, and other kind people who support Ukraine. So let me say this again. 70 to 80% of destroyed Russian equipment and soldiers were funded somewhere to the tune of 5 billion by your donations and of course some investments by the Ukrainian government, the United States of America, and some other European countries. What's missing for drones in Ukraine to get on the list of security guarantees? This production needs to be scaled up. A $25 billion investment will help produce enough drones to cover the entire 1,200-kilometer front line. With that sort of influx of drones, Russia will not be able to advance forward. Yes, drone technology can stop Russian advancement on its tracks. Is this going to be the end of war, or is it going to help free all occupied territories? Is this everything Ukraine need? No, of course there are other resources that are on a list of things we're going to be talking about. But again, drones are pivotal technology that needs to be scaled up. With the help of that technology, Russian losses can be brought up to 1 to 10 ratio. These sort of losses and inability to move forward will stop Moscow, and eventually they will get to a negotiation table. That's why this measure is so critical for the peace through strength policy to work. Is this a fantasy, or is this a specific and achievable objective? I'm confident this is an absolutely achievable goal. A 20 to $25 billion is without a doubt a very large investment. However, this is reasonable to expect that between the United States, European countries, and Ukraine itself, this sort of money can be found. Another security guarantee for Ukraine is the ability to control its own sky. That means short-term Ukraine needs assistance from the US and Europe with fighter jets and air defense. This is absolutely necessary for Ukraine to be in a position of strength. Long-term, Ukraine needs to be economically strong in order to purchase and maintain that equipment on its own. But at the moment, the West must step up and help Ukraine breach that gap. Of course, Ukraine also going to need long-range capabilities, HIMARSs, ATACMS, and other long-range, capabilities are still very critical. We're also going to be asking our senators and congressmen to increase the supply of 155 millimeter shells. They also continue to be very important in this war. What else will guarantee peace in Ukraine? We must leave all the sanctions and avoid doing business with Russia until they return all occupied territories. Now, I'm not an expert on sanctions, crude and LNG sales, or economy in general. But I will tell you one thing. If the West, that is United States, Europe, etc., normalizes its relations with Russia and goes back to business as usual, effectively, we will normalize mass murder, rape, torture, wiping out entire city blocks, and every other crime Russians have committed in Ukraine for the past 3 years. We will normalize acts like today when 6 children were killed among 16 civilians in Kryvyi Rih. With that act, should we normalize our relations with Russia? We will also normalize this sort of behavior not only for Russia and not only in Ukraine. Russia or any other would-be aggressor will take it somewhere else and then somewhere else again and again, and until no place in the world is safe. If we want security guarantees for Ukraine, and for that matter, for the rest of the free world, Russia must completely leave Ukraine before the free world even considers once again doing business with this terrorist state. Effectively, what will guarantee peace in Ukraine is a complete military defeat of the Russian aggressor in Ukraine and eventually a full return of all territories. By a complete military defeat, I mean a condition where Russia is no longer able to afford offensive operations against Ukraine. It has to be prohibitively expensive for Russia in terms of money and people to continue attacking Ukraine. Let me sum up everything we have discussed today. Next week, my friends and I are going to be in Washington, D.C., meeting with senators and representatives advocating important objectives for lasting peace in Ukraine. We are going to be asking the Congress to urge Trump's administration to pursue peace through strength in Ukraine as the only kind of peace possible when your neighbor is an aggressive nation that wants you to be conquered and destroyed. Any agreement that is not supported by military strength of Ukraine is not worth the paper it's going to be signed on. We believe if properly equipped with drones, armored vehicles, air defense, and other critical munitions, Ukraine is in a position to stop the aggressor, thus de facto achieving peace. It then would be up to the Western governments and, of course, residents of the free world to find some courage and do the right thing and maintain economic and political pressure on Russia until it leaves all the occupied territories and returns home. Also, supporting Ukraine is not charity. It is an America First investment in the US national security. If we do not stop Putin in Ukraine, we will have to deal with him in other places, like the Arctic or Europe. This possibility is very real. German intelligence has issued an alarming assessment. Russia could be capable of launching a conventional military offensive against NATO allies by 2027 and fully prepared for border conflict with Europe by 2030. According to leaked documents and briefings, the Kremlin is actually building stockpiles, ramping up industrial production, and reshaping its armed forces for large-scale conflict on the continent. Russian troops movements and force posturing already suggests contingency planning against Baltic states, Poland, and even Germany itself. If the US must get involved in a war, that will cost us trillions of dollars, and the lives of American boys and girls will also be on the line. This is a message we believe every senator and representative must hear, and this is why my friends and I are going to Washington, D.C. If you have any questions or thoughts about what I have talked about here, please feel free to leave a comment under this video or reach out to me on Facebook. My name is Alec Kasman, and I'm easy to find over there. If you find this video important, please share it with your friends and family. Thank you, and until the next time.